Serene had always known that her life would never be like the others. Born into a world of high expectations and rules, she was different from the moment she could remember. Her home was not a place of warmth and care, but a palace built on political power, where alliances were forged through marriage, not love. For as long as she could remember, Serene had been told that she was nothing more than a pawn in the great game of politics. A valuable pawn, yes, but a pawn nonetheless. Her heart had always been heavy with the weight of this reality. She had spent her childhood inside the walls of the palace, surrounded by guards and strict instructions. The people who came and went were not her friends. They were often visitors who were more interested in her marriage than her well-being. Serene's destiny had been chosen for her long before she could even understand it. She was meant to marry a powerful alien lord, a man who would use her as a symbol of his control over the weaker factions of her world. From the day her engagement was announced, Serene's life had been locked in chains. Chains that were not just physical but emotional too. She had never known what it was like to be loved, to be chosen for who she truly was. Instead, she was seen as a prize, an object to be used for political gain. Every day she walked the halls of the palace, her mind trapped in a cage of her own, longing for freedom, but knowing that it was not meant for her. As she sat in her chamber, one evening, staring out the window at the beautiful starry sky, she couldn't help but feel the suffocating presence of her fate closing in. The stars, though so far away, seemed like a distant dream. Freedom seemed like an impossible fantasy. But no matter how many times she told herself that this was her life, there was always a part of her that refused to believe it. The sound of footsteps outside her door interrupted her thoughts. She knew it was only the guard bringing her dinner, just like every other night. She had come to expect the routine, the food, the cold indifference, and the silence. But tonight, something felt different. Something was about to change. The door creaked open and the guard stepped inside. His face was expressionless, as always, his eyes avoiding hers. He placed the tray of food on the small table by the window and turned to leave without a word. Serene stared at the plate of food, but she couldn't bring herself to eat. She had lost her appetite long ago, as she had lost her will to fight. She was simply waiting for the day when her fate would be sealed, the day she would be handed over to the alien lord as his bride. As the guard turned to leave, something stopped him. Serene looked up, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was no warmth in the guard's gaze, only duty, but something in Serene stirred. She wondered what it would be like to have someone truly see her. She wondered what it would be like to be more than just a tool in someone else's plan. And then, as quickly as the moment came, it was gone. The guard turned and left the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Serene sat there alone with her thoughts. Her heart ached with the weight of her loneliness. It was a loneliness that no one in the palace could understand. She was surrounded by people, but she was still alone. They saw her as a symbol, a bride, a possession, but no one saw her as a person. That night, as she lay in her bed, Serene couldn't sleep. The silence of the palace felt deafening. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with thoughts of the life she was about to live. The chains that bound her seemed heavier with each passing day. She dreamed of freedom, of a life where she was not confined by the rules of her world. But even as the thoughts swirled in her mind, she knew that freedom was not a luxury she could afford. The palace had been built around her destiny. There was no escaping it. She had been chosen, and nothing she could do would change that. She had learned long ago that no one cared about her dreams or desires. She was a tool, a means to an end. And no one would ever see her for who she truly was, a person with hopes, fears, and a heart full of longing. The next morning, as the sun rose and filled her room with light, Serene couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. It was a feeling she couldn't explain, but it was there, quiet and persistent. She stood by the window again, looking out at the distant horizon. Her heart yearned for the world beyond the palace walls. She dreamed of running away, of leaving everything behind, But deep down, she knew that such dreams were just that, dreams. And yet, despite the heavy chains that bound her, Seren couldn't help but wonder, could it be possible that there was something more for her? Could there be someone who would see her for who she truly was, not just as a bride in chains, but as a person? As the day wore on and the sounds of the palace filled the air, Seren found herself standing at the edge of her reality. The path before her was unclear, and the chains around her felt more suffocating than ever. But for the first time in a long, while she allowed herself to wonder, what if there was more to her story than the life she had been forced to live? Seren's life inside the palace had always been predictable. The days blended into one another in a cycle of routine, one where the boundaries were well defined and the rules were simple. She was a bride in chains, nothing more, nothing less. But today, something felt different. It had been a week since the strange feeling had stirred in her chest, that tiny glimmer of hope that refused to be extinguished. She tried to push it away, but it lingered in the corners of her mind, like a secret she wasn't ready to acknowledge. What was this feeling? Was it hope? Was it longing for something more? Whatever it wasn't something Seren could ignore. Not this time. That afternoon, as the guards took her on her usual walk through the palace grounds, something unusual happened. She wasn't supposed to interact with anyone. Her presence was meant to be silent, a mere shadow in the background of the grand palace. But as she walked along the courtyard, the distant sound of voices made her pause. Turning slightly, she saw a group of strangers, humans, like the ones she had heard of, but never seen. They were gathered in the distance, speaking in hushed tones. At the center of the group stood a man. He was different from the others. Where the humans in the palace were usually quiet and respectful, this man exuded confidence. His dark hair, rugged jawline, and piercing eyes immediately drew Seren's attention. She didn't know why, but she couldn't stop looking at him. There was something about him that felt familiar. His gaze met hers from across the courtyard. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Their eyes locked, and Seren felt a strange pull, like he was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time in years. The gaze wasn't filled with pity, like everyone else who looked at her. No, this gaze held something different. Curiosity. Respect. Before she could look away, the man gave a slight nod, his eyes still fixed on hers. Seren quickly turned her gaze downward, her heart racing. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. Attention that wasn't born out of duty, obligation, or manipulation. She quickly walked away, her thoughts a whirlwind. As she retreated back into the silence of her chamber, Seren couldn't shake the memory of his eyes. Why had he looked at her that way? What did it mean? For the first time in her life, Seren wondered if there was more to her existence than just being the bride in chains. Could she be more? Was she allowed to be more? Days passed, but Seren couldn't forget the encounter. She tried to focus on her duties, but her mind kept drifting back to that moment in the courtyard. It had been a simple look, yet it had shaken her to her core. She had never felt that way before, not with anyone. The strange longing inside her heart grew stronger, and she realized that for the first time in years, she felt alive. Then, one evening, as Seren sat in the garden, her favorite secret place where she could be alone with her thoughts, she saw him again. The man. He was standing by the garden wall, his back to her, as though waiting for something. Seren's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea how to react. For a brief moment she debated whether to walk away or stay hidden, but something in her pushed her to step forward. Tentatively she moved closer, her footsteps light on the soft grass. The man turned slightly, as though sensing her approach. "Are you here to free me too?" Seren asked before she could stop herself. The words came out before she could think them through. The question felt strange, even to her, but she didn't regret it. The man turned fully now, facing her. His expression softened. "I wasn't sure if you would come," he replied quietly, "but I'm glad you did." There was something genuine in his voice, something that made Seren's heart race again. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to hide her emotions. She was allowed to feel, allowed to wonder about a different future. "You're human?" Serene asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She had heard stories about humans, small, insignificant creatures who had no place in the grand schemes of her world. They were not meant to be a part of her life, and yet, here he was, standing in front of her with a sincerity she hadn't known she could trust. He nodded. "Yes. My name is Ethan. I'm not here by chance. I'm here to help." "Help me?" Serene repeated, confusion clouding her thoughts. She had never known a human to offer help without wanting something in return. Her whole life had been shaped by power struggles and selfish intentions. She had never known kindness to be offered freely. "Yes," Ethan said with a gentle smile. "I know you're trapped here, and I don't think you belong in chains." Serene's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said something like that to her before. In that moment, everything inside her shifted. Could it be possible? Could she actually escape this prison she had been forced into? Was there really a chance for freedom? "You don't know what you're asking," Serene said, her voice trembling with the weight of the truth. "You don't understand how things work here." Ethan's smile didn't falter. "Maybe not, but I understand enough to know that you deserve better." There it was again, the warmth in his eyes, the unshakable belief in her that no one had ever shown. For the first time in her life, Serene felt like she mattered, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to hope, even if only for a moment. The world around them seemed to blur, and for just an instant, Serene forgot about the chains. She forgot about the palace and the life that had been chosen for her. In that moment, it was just her and Ethan, standing together in the garden, sharing an unspoken promise. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. The days that followed were filled with secret conversations and stolen moments. Serene could hardly believe that she was even considering the impossible, a life outside the walls of the palace, a life that was hers to shape. But it was all happening, so fast. Ethan's presence in her life had ignited something she thought she had lost long ago. Hope. And now, that hope had taken root deep in her heart, growing stronger with each passing day. Ethan was unlike anyone she had ever met. His words were not filled with empty promises. He didn't see her as just a pawn in the game of power. He saw her as a person, someone worth fighting for. And for the first time, Serene began to wonder if there was a chance for her to escape the life she had been born into. But the stakes were high. The palace was heavily guarded, and Serene knew that if she was caught, the consequences would be dire. One evening, when the stars were particularly bright, Serene met Ethan again in the garden. It was their secret meeting place, a small corner of the palace grounds where no one else ventured. The air was cool, and the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves created an atmosphere of calm, though Serene's heart was anything but calm. Ethan was already waiting for her, his face serious. "We need to talk," he said quietly, as if the very words were a heavy burden he had been carrying for some time. Serene took a deep breath and nodded. "What is it? Is it time to leave?" Her voice wavered, but her eyes were steady. She had made her decision, even if it was one she knew carried great risk. Ethan looked around, ensuring they were alone before lowering his voice. "I've been studying the layout of the palace. There are secret passages in the eastern wing, old ones, hidden from view, but they're dangerous and the guards don't patrol that area often." Serene felt her pulse quicken. "How do you know about them?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "I have my ways," he replied with a cryptic smile, his eyes gleaming with determination. "But the passages aren't enough. We need to be ready. There are guards at every corner, and they'll notice if we make a move too quickly." The weight of his words sank in. It wasn't just about leaving, it was about surviving. "What do you suggest?" she asked. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "We wait for the night of the full moon. It's when the palace celebrates, the ancient festival, and most of the guards will be distracted. That's our window of opportunity. Serene's heart fluttered in her chest. A full moon. The festival. The one night when everyone in the palace would be preoccupied. It was a slim chance, but it was a chance. I don't know if I can do this, Serene admitted, her voice trembling slightly. What if they catch us? What if we fail? Ethan reached out and took her hand gently. His touch was firm, reassuring. We won't fail. I'll be with you every step of the way. You won't be alone. The sincerity in his voice gave her the courage she needed. They would do this. Together. Over the next few days, Seren and Ethan meticulously planned every detail. They met in secret, using coded messages and gestures to communicate when others were near. Ethan would visit her as a servant during the day, while Seren would act as though nothing had changed. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience and cunning. But as the days passed, the weight of the plan began to press on Seren's shoulders. The night of the full moon was growing closer, and she could hardly contain the mixture of fear and excitement that swirled within her. She was about to do something she had never dreamed of, something that could change the course of her life forever. Then, one evening, just days before the full moon, Ethan approached her with a solemn expression. There's one more thing we need to discuss, he said. Serene felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What is it? Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. The guards are becoming more alert. They've noticed the recent increase in activity and they'll be on high alert during the festival. It's going to be harder than we thought. Seren's heart sank. They had to be perfect. There could be no mistakes. What do we do? I've been thinking, Ethan said, his gaze focused on the ground. We need a distraction, something to draw the guards' attention away from us. Serene raised an eyebrow. A distraction? What do you have in mind? Ethan's eyes sparkled with a plan. I know of a place deep within the palace, an area where the servants gather. It's the perfect spot for a diversion. I'll start a small fire in the far corner of the room. Nothing big, just enough to get the guards to focus on it. While they're dealing with that, we can slip away. Serene hesitated. It was risky. A fire, even a small one, could get out of hand. But she trusted Ethan. He had thought this through. She nodded slowly. We'll do it your way. With the plan in place, the final pieces began to fall into place. Seren and Ethan spent the following days preparing. Seren practiced moving quietly, making sure no sound would betray their movements. Ethan made sure they knew the exact location of the secret passages and where the guards would be positioned. On the night of the full moon, everything would come together. It was their only chance, and they were ready. As the night of the festival arrived, the palace buzzed with activity. Servants hurried back and forth, setting up decorations, preparing food, and making sure the guests were entertained. Seren's heart raced in her chest as she moved through the crowds, blending in with the others. She felt the weight of her decision pressing on her every step. Ethan was waiting for her in the shadows. Together they would make their move. They had no choice but to trust each other and their plan. And so, with the moon shining brightly above, Seren's life was about to change forever. But it wasn't just freedom she was after. It was the possibility of something more. A life where she could be her own person, not a pawn, not a prisoner. And with Ethan by her side, Seren knew that she wasn't just escaping the palace. She was escaping the chains that had bound her heart for so long. The night of the full moon had arrived. The air in the palace was heavy with excitement as servants scurried about, preparing for the ancient festival. The walls were lined with lavish decorations, and the scent of freshly prepared food filled the air. Inside, the sounds of laughter and chatter echoed through the corridors as guests mingled and celebrated. But for Seren, this night was not one of joy or festivity. It was a night of escape, of freedom, and of breaking the chains that had bound her for so long. She moved through the crowd, blending in like one of the many servants who hurried to and fro. Every step felt like it might be her last. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow and quick. The palace, with all its grandeur and power, seemed like a prison now, a gilded cage that had held her for too long. But tonight, it would all change. She glanced over at Ethan, who stood in the shadows, his eyes scanning the room. He was ready. They had prepared for this moment for weeks, every detail meticulously planned. Tonight, they would slip away unnoticed. But there was a constant fear in Serene's heart, a fear that clung to her despite the hope that had been growing in her for the past days. What if something went wrong? What if they were caught? Ethan caught her eye and gave her a reassuring nod. It was time. Serene's breath hitched as she straightened, trying to steady herself. She couldn't afford to falter now. As they had planned, Ethan moved toward the far corner of the room where a small fire could be started. He was ready to create the distraction they needed, just enough chaos to draw the guards away from their path. Serene, meanwhile, would make her way toward the eastern wing of the palace where the secret passage was hidden. It was their only chance. The moment Ethan started the fire, Serene felt her pulse spike. She glanced over, seeing the flames flicker in the distance. Panic spread through the room as the servants scrambled to put it out. It was the perfect diversion. The guards moved toward the fire, their attention diverted from Serene. She had no time to waste. Serene took a deep breath, pushing the fear down into the pit of her stomach. This was it. This was the moment when she would finally take control of her own destiny. She darted toward the eastern wing, her movements swift and silent. Every corner, every hallway seemed to stretch on forever as she ran, her heart beating, louder with each step. When she reached the entrance to the hidden passage, she stopped for a moment, allowing herself to breathe. The passage was dark and narrow, just as Ethan had described it. The walls were lined with moss and the air was damp. It was a far cry from the grand halls of the palace, but it was her way out. It was her chance at a life she had only dared to dream of. As Serene stepped into the passage, she heard footsteps behind her. A cold chill swept over her as she realized the guards must have returned to their posts. She had to hurry. Her legs carried her faster, her breath growing ragged. She moved through the passage, following the path she had memorized. The wall seemed to close in on her, but she pushed forward, the image of freedom keeping her moving. She had made it this far. There was no turning back now. After what felt like an eternity, Serene saw the light at the end of the tunnel. She was almost there. She could see the faint outline of the exit ahead, and the fresh air outside beckoned her. But just as she reached the end, she heard voices. Guards. They were close. Too close. A surge of panic rose in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She ducked down into the shadows, praying they wouldn't spot her. The guards passed, oblivious to her presence, and Serene let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She was free, so close to freedom that it was almost within her grasp. Just then, she heard another set of footsteps, slower and more deliberate. She knew who it was. Ethan. She turned to face him, her heart lifting at the sight of him. He had done it. He had kept his promise. The guards hadn't caught him. Ethan's eyes met hers, and for a moment, everything else faded away. There were no guards, no palace, no chains. There was only them, together free. The world outside was waiting for them, a world they could now explore on their own terms. Serene smiled, a smile that was filled with more than just relief. It was filled with the realization that she was not just escaping her chains, but the life she had been forced to live. She was reclaiming her identity, her future. They walked out of the hidden passage, leaving the palace behind them. The cool night air greeted them, and Serene closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the freedom she had never known. The stars above were brighter than she had ever seen them, and for the first time, she felt like she truly belonged to the world. Ethan reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with determination. Serene nodded. "I am." Together they walked into the unknown, into the future they would build for themselves. They didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, Serene didn't need to know. She had found her freedom, and with it, a chance to live a life beyond the chains that had bound her for so long. As they walked side by side, Seren realized that she was no longer the girl who had been trapped in a palace, a pawn in a political game. She was free, and that was all that mattered.